Kemi, interview one, take one.
I hope it's all at that level. It's insane.
Welcome back to Radio Juxtapoz. My name's Doug Gillen. Today you join me from the Sim Smith Gallery in South London in conversation with British artist Kemi Onabulé. Since her debut solo show at Guts Gallery back in 2020, it seems like the momentum has only grown for painter and printmaker Kemi Onabulé. The warming embrace of the vividly coloured paintings that adorn the walls of this gallery starkly contrast the bitter, cold, grey January London that exists on the other side. With only 3 years behind her as a full-time artist, her second solo show, All the Land is Spoken For at Camberwell Sim Smith, marks a deeper exploration into our relationship with the natural world. Taking a step back from the clearly defined figurative works of previous exhibitions, the majority of this body focuses on the English landscape. A modern twist on Constable or Turner, these luminous oils glow and swirl in this exploration of identity, nationalism and ecology. If you happen to be listening from the US, Kemi currently has work showing at the James Cochrane Gallery in New York and will be showing later on this year at Night Gallery in LA. All the details for these exhibitions will be in the show notes of this episode. As always, if you enjoyed this, let us know, give us a follow over on Instagram, and why not let us know if there's any guests you'd love us to get on the podcast. Let's get into it right here, right now with Kemi Onabulé on Radio Juxtapoz. We're sitting here in Sim Smith Gallery, in amongst your artwork. My original question when we had planned this is the day of the opening. How do you feel pre-exhibition, pre-opening? This is the rescheduled interview. So day after, the morning after, how do you feel right now?
I feel good.
Congratulations, by the way.
Thank you.
It was great.
Thanks so much. No, I feel good. It was great. I had an artist talk or a conversation with Dr. Edwin Kumbasaru, and he's very sanguine. And he just calmed me right down, and we were able to have a really interesting conversation about the paintings, about ecology, like our relationship to nature, which are really heavy themes in the work. So it just settled. I think everyone really understood what was happening in the show.
It's quite a lot to take on that at your opening, to sit down and be like, we're digging in.
You were digging, and it actually...
He's a doctor.
He's a doctor.
He's not just some guy with a microphone. And
I kept calling him doctor because I was like, this is important. You work hard for this title. I'm going to keep using it. So that was really great. And I felt that the work stood up to that kind of engagement. And there were lots of artists in the room who were also interested and happy to kind of engage in the paintings on a painterly level, not just on a kind of talking, intellectual kind of...
Have you ever sort of had your work picked apart, or you even picked apart in that kind of clinical, that academic way?
No, and it's a completely different way of looking at art in a great way. Like, it's necessary. And I'm a bit of I just get in the studio, do what I do, and think about it much later. But you see, for some people, analysis is just part of every moment of their life. And I'm like, I'm not that way, but I'm interested in that way of being. So it was great to have that at the opening. And I think I felt better for it.
Did you take anything away from it? Because obviously once you have somebody else, especially someone of esteem, take a critical look at your work and your practice, and ultimately you, does it, or did last night in any way, alter your perception of how other people might see it or how you feel about your work?
I think it added weight. I feel like the work is quite intense. The show is quite intense. The themes are quite somber in some ways. And to have it grounded in a slightly less emotional place, though the work is very emotional, and kind of add historical context and like the relationship with English landscape painting and that relationship to industrialization and so on and so forth. So there's just a lot of connections that I'm always thinking about, but struggle to kind of be eloquent in speech, and he's just very good at that. And a lot of the questions were good as well afterwards.
Have you ever thought about your work in the kind of context, the wider context of art history and where you fall into?
Not probably till this show. I feel like it's in a way takes a lot of ego to be like, where am I in the canon? Yeah, it's just like, it's a bit insane. So it's not that I'm not doing that. I'm just engaging with it maybe more than I would have done a few years ago. I'm less, I think for my earlier paintings, I was almost anxious to escape and to find something different or more unknown, more mysterious in the painting, something that maybe an audience from home would be like, oh, where is this place? What does this mean? Now people are definitely recognizing the landscape, and that's actually kind of comforting. And I think people engage with it more. Like they see themselves more in it.
Where is the landscape?
Whereas, I mean, to me, it's kind of
these real places.
They're not necessarily real, but they're from observations, whether it be a cut down tree or me going for a walk spent a lot of time in Surrey, a lot of time in the kind of southeast of the country, which...
All England?
Yeah, in many, I think it's a generalized English landscape. So I know this kind of flat, even, cultivated, beautiful, but very controlled, like landscape. That's what I'm familiar with, and that's kind of what I'm putting in. It's not, I wouldn't call it magnificent. Like I wouldn't call the English landscape magnificent. I think the Scottish landscape definitely is.
I mean, I'm not going to disagree with you on that one.
Or the north of England. You did win. But the south of England it's quite a passive space. So I'm interested in that kind of cultivation and what it says about the country and the history and all of those kind of things. And that's started to leak out into the work, I think.
All the Land is Spoken For feels like at this exact moment, feels like a very pertinent title. Was that the starting point of the body of work? How was it structured?
I mean, it's something that I'm always thinking about, this need to own or to overtake landscapes, whether that be for cultural reasons, wars, colonization. You know, there are many reasons why people move into different spaces and create ownership around it. But then in the last few months, that has kind of hit a new meaning, not for the people experiencing these things in the places that they've always been experiencing, but I think for a Western audience, they're suddenly grappling with the history and why people are so angry in different, not angry, but why people's history's been so affected in certain parts of the world. And so maybe talking about it from a home perspective, you know, Britain itself is a colonized nation in terms of its psychology, its history, its understanding of itself. It's almost like it's lost its own understanding of the land. When most cultures have that relationship, but maybe Britain was the first place it colonized. It colonized itself first and then moved outwards, which is an interesting thought to reflect back on oneself rather than always outside.
When did this title kind of kick in? Do you remember that moment?
I think it was around 3 or 4 months ago. I was watching a video with an artist. I do not remember their name, but they said a line where he was talking about when he was growing up, he would go out into the landscape, and then he suddenly realized that, oh, this land is owned by people. And it was like a loss of innocence for him, that he never imagined land in that kind of function as a part of an economy or something like that. And then he suddenly realized, oh, all this land is spoken for by people. People own this space. And that kind of just hit home. And something I grew up spending a lot of time out in the countryside, going to schools out of the town I was in, and there was a level of freedom that you would experience just being outside, being in fields, not being bothered by teachers. You know, there's just a freedom that you can experience that is really valuable. So yeah, I think that's when that came through.
Where did you grow up? I mean, I just read it as London, and that's such a vague answer.
I was born in London, and then we very quickly moved out of London to north of Luton. And then I've been between there since university, so about 10 years now, kind of living this almost dual life of being in specifically Southeast London and then going back and forth.
So have you always had that kind of strong affinity then with the natural landscape?
I think it's kind of like you're longing for it. Like I long for nature, but then I also long for the city.
You long for a time?
Not really.
The world in your paintings, like these could be landscapes from now, but this time period, I get a sense that it's certainly not as reflective of now. It's certainly not reflective of Britain right now. And I wonder if there's a sense of a longing for a particular time within your work.
I don't know if it's in the past that I'm longing for necessarily. There's an element of that. But I think it's a kind of future projection where we've kind of rediscovered our space and place in the world. So it's maybe...
I think it could be tricky as well when you start to long for a past, because it's so rose-tinted and things like that.
Completely.
The kind of the destruction of nostalgia is it can be quite poisonous at times, you know?
It is, and interestingly, landscape painting is often used as a tool to kind of stir up feelings of longing for a past time. Usually it's aligned with nationalism. If you look at German history and British history within painting. So there's that complicated relationship to things, which I think I'm interested in that as well, the tension that comes with that. I think it's a wide open space in the modern kind of artistic landscape. I almost feel like people don't know what to do with landscape painting because everything is so figure-based at the moment.
Everything's really figure-based, and there's a lot of the work that I had seen from you it wasn't necessarily central around a character, but there was always people present within there. In a lot of this work, you've stepped away from that. Is that for this show, or is that something that's always been quite consistent, this idea of trying to be able to break away from total figuration?
I think I was getting frustrated. It's like, it's important, but for the dynamic of a painting or paintings that I enjoy. So I went to see interestingly actually, I went to see the Nicole Eisenman show at Whitechapel.
I swear, this is now the fourth
you should go.
fifth person to bring up the Nicole Eisenman show. It's insane how many people have brought that up.
Well, because I think she is a figure. She works with the figure a lot, but the figure becomes a landscape. The way she plays with the paint, there's this kind of cartoonish element to it. So I think if you're going to do the figure, it has to be like, at some point for me, I'm like, okay, I need to work on why I'm doing this. What does it relate to within painting, but also experimentation with paint? So I think I'm reevaluating why I'm painting the figure, and then I kind of take things out, think about them, then put them back in. But it has to, I have to keep pushing. I mean, every show I try and keep pushing one element, whether it be the foliage, the structure of the paintings, the scale of the paintings. I think the last few years has been really important for that. But yeah, I love that show, the Nicole Eisenman show. Would recommend.
I think it closes.
I think it does in 2 days.
I think it's literally the last episode. By the time this is over, the ship has sailed. What were some of the sort of the differences and themes then that you were wanting to tackle in this body of work that maybe you hadn't done before, or was it more of a technical developmental exercise?
I think it's both. I think it's a technical development. There's more perspective. There's different perspectives. There's more dynamics within the show and each painting. It's less front-on figure foliage. You can lock yourself into those things very easily. And now the figures are existing within the space. They're not being presented to you so much. Or if they're being presented to you, they're engulfed by the environment. And that's been great. And also just having no figures in the painting has been great. It's very freeing to just have a tree or some grass, and that's something I'll continue for the next show.
Is that new for this one?
Yes, yeah.
What were some of the challenges in that then for you as an artist trying to break away from something that felt, I guess, I hope this doesn't get taken the wrong way, but safer, having a figure in there and then suddenly being able to go, okay, well, actually, let's focus on this tree.
I think it was, there's some trees that were figures before, and I just painted over them. I was like, no more. So I find change easy. I'm not like in my studio feeling anxious, how's this going to work? I'll get maybe one or two opinions outside of myself that I trust, and they usually will echo what I'm feeling about it.
Oh, you trust them?
Yeah, exactly. Biased.
I think they call that an echo chamber.
Yeah. And I'm like, this echo chamber works for me. But I think you kind of have to, there has to be an edge with the people who are in your studio so their work can be completely different to mine. And I kind of like that when there is almost no relationship to our practices, but they kind of understand the sensibilities that I'm trying to bring to my own work. And that can be vice versa.
The artists, do you like the opinion of artists?
Yes.
They need to be artists?
No, it can be anyone. Artists tend to be more technical and to the point. If you get a writer in there, they'll be talking about something completely that is important, but it's not about the aesthetics. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, it's a game of aesthetics, what we're doing. It's a visual experience.
Unpack that one for me. I like that. I've never heard that expression, a game of aesthetics. So what do you mean by that?
It's not a sound recording. It's not a film, which involves those two things: sound, visuals, direction, editing. So there's none of that. It has to function. Just you look at it, you engage with it. It can be a split second, but it has to have an impact on that level. And then you can read into it.
Story of English landscape
exactly.
painting.
But if it doesn't do anything for you, then it's kind of, it's everything's biased, but if it doesn't have some bite to it, then what's the point? So that's the thing I'm kind of trying to engage with more at the moment. And that can be about the thickness of the paint, the weight of the canvas, the way it's small things that for me make really great paintings. Obviously, my work's figurative, so it's different for abstract artists and so on and so forth. I feel like that's what I'm always pushing.
Do you see yourself slipping into an abstract route? I think that feels like such a kind of trajectory. You're like, cool, I've learned how to paint the body, and then it's like suddenly the body's gone, you're doing, and then it's like, oh, okay, here we go.
Yeah. All my favorite painters change so much. So, not even painters, but artists, someone like Kiki Smith, who's works with print or sculpture or not really painting, but she does paint. Even someone like Philip Gusson, who was painting the figure, then he wasn't, then he was again. But it's not the figure like it was when he was 20. It's a completely different engagement.
A slight thread, a connection of that person's history in their hand that they can't shake, but it's a completely different painting that you could almost say was done by a different artist, but actually as soon as you connect those dots, you're like, well, of course it was painted by that artist.
Exactly. And I love that. I think if you just keep evolving, maybe that's naive, but I think there's no problem in just like, okay, now I've done I'm just going to focus on tree bark. Or that becomes its own form of abstraction when you zoom in so heavily into things. So who knows? I've still got time. I've got time.
That's what you think.
I should start now. Well,
what was your relationship with art then growing up? Was it always part of your life? You're speaking of these artists that have these kind of like grander careers and trajectories behind them. So was art always part of your life?
I mean, yeah, I've grew up with parents who were in the arts. My dad's a musician, but he studied fine art.
Musician as well, aren't you?
I do make music, yeah. I used to.
For the podcast, there was a slight twinge in the face there.
Yeah. Not had a lot of time recently, but who knows? But so it's always been there. Always kind of gone to exhibitions. Not a lot, but once my parents kind of saw that I enjoyed it, they encouraged it. It was very natural, and it was easy, and you could just be quiet and do some painting. So no one's going to be like, do something else. And then at around 16, I had some great art teachers in my sixth form, and they just really encouraged me to, I don't know, almost professionalize the way I was working. It was now I look at the way they taught, it was a very good setup for what I'm doing at the moment.
Go on.
About being consistent, looking at your technical, bettering yourself technically, copying older artists.
Let's go back then. You're 16 years old and I look in your sketchbook. What does it look like?
I mean, there's a lot of Lucian Freud, because why not? It's portrait.
Pretty fucking good at it.
Pretty great.
You're going to copy from someone.
Exactly. Also, my teacher was great she loved oil paint, and so she was like, you should do oil paint pretty much immediately from when I started painting. And then I was painting portraits that were quite strong from a young age, and then I kind of moved away. But I think this foundation of quite thorough technical understanding of paint, kind of loosening it up after university, and then now I feel like getting back into that kind of, I think these paintings relate more to the paintings I was making in my teenage years, weirdly. Aesthetically, I don't know why. The way I'm using the paint is almost going back there.
Because you had a period, now you just revisit it, but with a kind of more informed approach, I guess.
Exactly.
Do you enjoy oils? Do you enjoy that different approach to making it and the different results that can bring you? I
mean, I love oil paint. I think you can do anything with it. It's really one of the most versatile ways of working. I've tried acrylic. I hate it. I'm just not great with it. There's an underpainting that I often work on with acrylic, but then I have to, oil just makes things alive. I don't know, it creates this organic element within the work. I'm addicted. I should probably try some other things. I mean, I print and use watercolor, so there's that other side of the practice as well.
In her painting, All That Eats Is Eaten from 2023, a genderless nude figure looks across the plains, holding the lifeless body of a snake in their hand. This not-so-quiet nod to Christian lore invites questions on what shape the world would take if not for the indoctrination of organised religion. I wanted to find out more from Kemi about the role religion played in her life and in the work.
I do think I'm not a religious person, and I have not, but my dad grew up with quite religious parents, and so there was that filtered through when they would visit. I was suddenly confronted by religion, and
what was this religion?
It was Islam. So they're Muslim, but then they're also Christians in the family, because it's a Nigerian family, and they're often mixed religions.
Break that down for me. We're talking English, Greek, Nigerian.
A lot going on.
Greek Orthodox?
Yes. Yeah, but my Greek grandfather grew up in Egypt, because there were a lot of Greeks in Alexandria before Suez Canal. And so then he left, but he was more culturally Arabic in many ways. In his understanding of the world, he was kind of North African, but Greek inherited.
A little Ottoman in there.
Yeah, it's all going on. Not that they'd like to know that, but it's true. There's all these convergent, strong cultures and religions going on in the house, and artifacts from all of these places, family photographs. So I think it just seeps in there, and people's lives are still being dominated by these very heavy theologies, very intense ways of living. So it seemed unavoidable in some ways. I personally don't really have a relationship to religion in that way, but I think it's naive to not put it in painting. Painting is so heavily influenced by that. It's almost like you gotta get stuck in. The minute you go into the National Gallery or any space where there's historical painting, and it bolsters the work in some ways, because these ideas are so crazy, so dramatic, so filled with contradictions. Like, I think as I get older, I'm more fascinated by it.
As a voyeur, there's probably something a bit kind of like weird to be engaging in such, but it does influence people's lives. It influences family members' lives in all kinds of ways. Coming from a background of, so much going on, was there conflict between these, or was it quite harmonious? Did you get to see, was religion particularly functioning in quite a holistic way that felt like an extension and a real, something that would lift people up rather than what we see so much on, just turn on the news right now and it crushes people?
I think people's, at least having heard my granddad's experience of Alexandria when he was growing up. He was born in 1930. And there were Jewish people, Christians, Muslims, all living together in Alexandria pretty harmoniously and engaging with one another in a way that was very equal. So that was kind of his understanding of religion. And then on my dad's side, Nigerians, it's a multi-faith country. So you have, now things are changing a bit.
What do you mean?
As in, things have hardened, people have hardened for lots of reasons. Not the general population, but you have this influx of kind of jihadists and stuff in the north. So things have shifted, but at least when I was a kid and hearing about people's relationship to one another, it was like people intermarry. And
it's not a problem.
I mean, it might be, but less of, people aren't going to be like, I have so many cousins. A lot of my cousins are Christian. I didn't grow up necessarily with a lot of religion, and some are Muslim. And this is perfectly normal and very common, at least in my group, my family's group, which is Yoruba people. And so that's kind of, it brings a kind of community and understanding that people are the same. They just go to different places to pray. So that's an interesting something maybe that's also played into the way I generalize the spaces and the people within my work. They're not definable by those kind of external things. They don't even have hair to let you know whether they're male or female. So it's like trying to even out those differences maybe within the work.
There's definitely a sense of trying to strip away those power structures, whether it's the patriarchy, whether it's religion, things like that within your work. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah. I think it's subconscious, but maybe it's growing up feeling like lots of things and seeing lots of different cultures and histories. And ultimately, people are just trying to do the same thing, which is survive.
Particularly at the moment, it feels like we've gone from thrive
to survive.
Just like get through this shit.
Yeah, it's feeling like that.
How do you feel when you're painting?
I feel zoned in. Like, I don't feel distracted. I don't feel anxious. I mean, sometimes a painting will give anxiety. Like, there's one painting in this show that was giving me anxiety.
You've got to ask you which one.
It's the one with the figure crouching down in the tree. Oh man, I had to repaint that a few times.
Why?
It was just a small kind of the first layer of color I put down next to the colors I laid on top just weren't functioning well in the next to one another. So it's small things like that can give me a bit of. Kept showing my partner at like midnight, like, what do you think? This painting on like a tiny
fucking care anymore.
It's like, I don't know.
Great. All right.
And then the worst part is when you get a vague answer because you're like, it's not as good as I want. I have to go back in there. So that was fine. But I kind of like that. Once you've battled with it and you come out on top, sometimes you're like, you sort things out within a painting.
How do you feel about it now?
I like it. I think there's things that I resolved in that I can take into a different paintings or shows, or, with the thickness of the paint at the top in the sky. And the speed at which that last layer went on was kind of a nice way to work.
What is the architecture of a painting for you then?
I mean, it's generally first layer of the painting is kind of a specific color that I feel.
What goes before that then? Where does it, are you sketching? Is it?
Yeah, oh yeah. I mean, there's sketching, there's...
How much of an idea do you have in your head of what that's going to look like before you start, and how similar is that to the kind of final result, and what are those stages within it, I guess is probably a better question.
I'm looking now. I mean, a lot of these paintings will have come from sketches that I'll do on the train, or I would have seen an image maybe in a book or on Instagram or on the internet in general, and I'll screenshot that and then I'll think about it as a composite. I won't just copy it out, but it might be a canyon with trees across it, and I'll say, okay, how can I involve that in a painting? And then I'll sketch. I don't do a huge amount of the same sketch over and over again. If something's good,
ideas there,
yeah, I'll isolate that. So, and then I'll place that within the work. And then when it comes to the painting, it will be acrylic, very quick sketch, again, like a drawing. Mm-hmm. And then I might hate that, but I'll be like, okay, I'm going to paint it anyway. And then I'll battle with it, and then it will come out fine in the end. But it's like, I think some paintings happen in hours and others take weeks. And you just have to see it through to the end. I work quickly, so when things start to go into the second month of painting it, I'm like, what's happening?
What will it take you to just scrap something and start again?
Some things I just don't see them they don't have a context in the work. They might be useful for learning about the color or the structure of what I want to do in another painting, but they don't fulfill what I want from painting fully. And I'm quite happy. I used to really want to make everything work, but I'm like, and it can be a big painting that's really grand in its ambitions, but if it's not working, I'm just not going to put it in.
Are you thinking in terms of shows then, or are you thinking of individual bodies? Or do you just start painting and then start to figure out
it builds.
There's a universal theme connecting all these?
Yes. Yeah. Like for this show, Sim came and we were discussing it, and it's also quite collaborative. I'm quite happy to present whoever I'm working with the body of works that I've made, and then from there we can talk about it and does this work with this? What is this saying? And I think every show is a kind of puzzle for me. It has to work in the space. I can't just make it as a body and then say it's all going up and this is what it is. Then it, to me, is kind of a way of designing. And I don't think I'm designing something. I'm like, so for this, there were paintings that just didn't work together when we put them in the space. And I didn't have them in the show.
That's interesting. So what is it that you're looking for from a gallery? The structure of the art world is so ever-changing. Artists definitely have so much more of an independence, and the reliance or the role of a gallery seems to be changing. So for you as an artist, what is it that you're looking for from a gallery?
I think space, time to make, obviously with an understanding that I would like a career, so there has to be some...
I think you've got a career, don't you?
No, but a consistent one, so...
How long have you been full-time on this?
4 years.
The second solo
with
year.
Sim, yeah, third in general.
Yeah, in the space of 3 years?
Yeah,
post-COVID, right?
It's been intense.
Would I call you a post-COVID painter? A post-COVID artist?
A post-COVID full-time painter, which... So it's not been very long, but it feels like a lot has... I've changed a lot, the work has changed a lot, but it still feels organic. It doesn't feel like, and that has, when I decided to work with Sim in a consistent way, I noticed that she's very attentive to what you need and what your work is saying and how you make. And she was encouraging me to keep making a variety of stuff. Like, not just this thing, but all of it. Make all of it all the time if that's what you want to do. And then figure it out as you go along. And for someone whose focus is a bit all over the place, that was like, wow, I can just... So that, not having to compromise that, but also being able to be consistent and have shows coming up and not neglect my natural way of working has been really good.
What is your natural way of working?
Random. This is my natural way of working.
Are you a sort of 3 a.m. kind of painter?
No, I mean, it's random. Once I'm in the studio, I'll be going between things. Multiple paintings. I mean, I'm very consistent in the sense that on a day-to-day basis, I'm at the same time, and I leave at the same time. And I'm a daytime painter. Like, I'm not going past 10.
And as a mother, this must inform a lot of your practice.
Yes.
So, like, I'm just doing the math now. So you got twins who are 2.5 years old, and a full-time art career that came out post-COVID. So this was like a big transition for you round about that post-COVID era.
Yeah. And
that must have been quite an intense period.
It was, but I think it's kind of allowed me to be very structured, and all the kind of extra bits of life of like, oh, maybe I'll just sit here for 3 hours and watch videos, which is very easily done in a studio. Not that I don't do that, but there's a sense of like, okay, now let's figure out what's going on. And I feel more attuned to the work in a weird way. I don't know. A lot more focused, but then also lots of time to explore within the studio. I find the studio it's changed a lot. I've moved space a lot, but now I feel more settled where I am. And that's been really good.
Are you kind of like still digging through other references as you're going, or what is it that you're sourcing or looking for inspiration during these periods in the studio? In the last couple of years, have you had that kind of writer's block that just stops you, or are you kind of churning things out constantly?
I mean, I have it, but I think I'm so desperate to be there by the time I get there. I'm like, this is great. It's a holiday. It's peaceful. It's quiet. It's calm. So I think I value that time so much. I almost don't have time to worry about, or hesitate. It sounds funny, but it just all seems very lucid suddenly. Or I feel that about the work.
I'm interested in this particular period then of you kind of going full time. How did that come? How did you know that it was the right time? What was it that kind of got you into that place, going from before into going, hey, now I'm doing solo shows and exhibiting, consistently? I
mean, it was quick, but it also feels like it was built on a lot of consistency and working with different group shows. So it felt like a gradual step up, and then suddenly I feel like it was manageable. I wasn't suddenly unable to cope. I've been very lucky in that sense that I can manage it all, but I've just had to be very, very organized about things.
Has becoming a mother changed your practice in any way?
I mean, obviously I can't just sketch whenever I want or do these kind of things.
Change the work.
I think it's definitely made the work, again, because of all of these factors of time and energy. I've just had to be more focused, and that has given me a boost. I think people giving me a deadline, and I'm like, I can do that instead of worrying about it for 6 months.
Over the period of working in these themes, has it changed, or how has your understanding of what it means to be human changed?
I mean, that relates to motherhood, really, doesn't it? And dealing with very basic parts of life. Survival. Survival is something that can't look after itself. And so everything becomes much more visceral. It's not, if you need to go and get shopping, you have to factor. There's so many logistical things that suddenly are important for you to plan ahead for. And I think that's played into how specific I am in the paintings, whether it be, sounds funny, like the thickness of the sky in a certain area. I'm just more aware of everything, more tuned into everything, more tuned into how other people paint and why they're making that decision. So yeah, I think a lot of growing up in the last 3 years. And obviously I'm feeling more relaxed now. That early part of children is coming, that very early stage. Settling. And so I'm feeling more like flexible and like myself, and I can go here and I can be doing different kind of activities, and I'm sleeping more, which helps.
Different boring.
Which really helps a lot.
Aware of that early.
Yeah, I know. Like, you've taken a lot of drugs and you just have to function throughout the day.
How would you say your relationship is then with these kind of urban spaces, with the city? Because there's obviously this kind of sense of longing for a natural world within there. But how do you feel being in the city and in these built up, developed spaces? Do you feel a connection to it? Do you feel?
I do. I mean, that's why I like South London so much, is you've got very large green spaces that are kind of protected for the population to be in. But then you also, our studio is near the Aylesbury estate, which is one of the biggest council estates in Europe, if not the biggest. And it's more or less derelict, but the council just keep it running. And so you're witnessing this kind of quite desperate experience of city life next to Burgess Park, which is like green, and it's this duality that I'm kind of fascinated in London specifically. It's a very unusual city in the sense that it's incredibly green, but it's also incredibly densely packed. So I do, I think weirdly being in a city has made me engage with what landscape means more, in a more complicated way possibly than if I just stayed in the countryside. I'd be like, oh, the hedges are pretty, but
well, that's it, because it isn't that side of landscape painting.
No, it's not like, oh, in this nice fields and
what is the difference then? Because it's not, I don't ever look at your work and think that, but what is it that separates that?
I mean, I think the colours are a bit dystopian, especially in this show. Not dystopian, but they're not easy to digest. Like, it's yellows and oranges and purples and kind of vivid greens, not pastoral greens, but kind of neon-y, acidic greens. So I think there's lots to consider. It's almost like these paintings they're like a stage set. They look like they've been modelled, and I'm just painting the model version of a landscape.
What informs the colour palette then?
I mean, it kind of plays from painting to painting. I look at the one I've made before, I'm like, okay, how can I respond to that one? And the theme of this show was quite somber, and I think then that just rolls on to the next thing. But I think for my next show, I'm almost want to reverse that, and that's more about me technically just wanting to understand how to paint with more bright, vivid colors, how to use white properly. Like, these are the things that will go into my head as I go into the studio. Will be, okay, I've done dark, I've done somber, how do I reverse that, make a daylight version almost?
That a show that's in production? Is it locked off, or is this still sort of in the early stages?
I mean, I have a show later on in the year with Night Gallery in LA in end of June, so I've got time. And maybe also the landscape of LA is kind of playing in my subconscious, and that idea of a place, and it's a desert. It's also got this huge population.
Are you making the work for that environment then?
Not, it's in my mind.
Do you see the body of work changing, starting to feel, because this feels, very British.
Yeah, it does.
There, do you think that desert, that raw,
I think it will play
dry
a
land
part.
will start to come in?
I think it will, and I tend to end up going, if I go travel, I tend to go to like very dry parts of Spain or southern Italy. So I've kind of engaged with that landscape a lot recently. And it's so drastically different to the vivid green of Britain that it's kind of attractive. It just offers something different in painting. So yeah, it won't be a complete change, but it is in my mind. I almost feel like I have to respond to the ecology of the place that I'm working with.
How has working with the British landscape impacted how you feel about Britain?
I think it's made me feel more warmly towards.
Does it develop a stronger sense of connection to it?
I think
Do you feel more further away, or?
I feel closer to it. I think after Brexit and the pandemic and a lot of grim politics that we've been experiencing the last decade, it's kind of I feel a bit alienated towards it as a place. I think a lot of people kind of struggling to understand what Britishness means at the moment, or Englishness means.
I think the wrong people seem to be hijacking what that Britishness means.
Yes, yeah.
It's like, and you talked, I don't even know if it was before we hit record, but it was like this idea of how the landscapes had been used as forms of nationalist propaganda. And it's like, well, is this an attempt to reclaim those tools? The Olympics were such a turning point for what that idea of Britishness.
Yes, yeah.
And actually, it was like, this is kind of cool. Like
3 days.
It was like kind of like the right people live behind this message.
Yeah, it felt heartfelt. It is an element of that, and also one finds in more rural places, there's a weird thing where people are on one hand much more conservative, but they can also be more helpful and engaged in the moment. So I think there's that sense. I was looking at Ingrid Pollard's work, who she's an older, she's kind of older mid-career.
That was very diplomatic.
Thank you.
Nailed it.
She's from a Caribbean background, and I don't know if she's born in this country, but she often engages in landscape, the English landscape, being a black person in this country and what that kind of history entails, and it's a way of grounding her in a place that she often felt slightly ill at ease at or rejected by. Like that idea, and it kind of made me think, oh well, why don't I feel like I shouldn't be doing that? Like there's something in that of a kind of almost self-therapy that you can have through the art. And I think that has definitely helped kind of claw back some of my disdain for the moment we're in.
And I imagine for other people as well.
Hopefully. I mean, I hope seeing someone like me paint the paintings I paint will make people think, oh, maybe I can engage in that subject matter as well.
Do you ever feel that there was like some sense of pressure, either, put on yourself or from external places, to make a certain type of work, to not make British landscapes that felt like they could have been painted by the hand of, someone like Turner?
I don't know if I ever cared. I think there was almost like, I don't know what to do with you, that kind of thing. Like, you're not from here, you don't fit in this box, but you also do this, and then you also so I'm like, and I'm so young, you know how some artists have this whole history of, no one wanted me to paint like this, but I did it. I'm like, no one's against me. I just on my own in a room, I just want to paint. No one's going to be like, you can't paint that. So I don't have that antagonistic relationship to, I'm not Kanye West. That kind of sense of like, no one wants me to do what I'm doing. But I think there's not much precedent. So I think, okay, well, this is what I enjoy. This is what I like to paint. Let me do it. I don't think it matters what other people expect of you necessarily. People expect all kinds of stuff. They always do. There's definitely a trend towards figuration.
With artists of color?
I think so. I think because it's almost like a way of pushing against other people's representation of you, is to over-represent yourself in a way, is to be like, this is what we are. I'm like, okay, that's interesting, but I kind of never wanted to do that, so I kind of
like it's cool that they've done that, but that's not for you.
I'm not annoyed, I'm not upset, but I'm not like, but it's not necessarily what I'm interested in doing. So I'll just do what I'm doing and look at what other people are doing and enjoy that for what it is. But I don't feel the pressure to push that into my own painting.
How much does identity politics factor into how you're presenting yourself as an artist then? That's not too loaded.
I mean, it's in everything you do, really. You just, in terms of, I just try and be myself, whatever that means. And that comes with a lot of contradiction and complexity for a lot of reasons, being mixed race, being a woman, you know, for a lot. I love reading comments on YouTube videos with female artists. It's just guys who are just angry. Angry
guys that almost never have a picture of themselves in their profile.
Never. But so I'm like, people are going to be annoyed, whatever. Some people, very few, will be annoyed, whatever you do. So just do what you're doing.
Anything else that you want to say to the world?
Come see the show if it's edited before the show ends.
Does the show end?
It ends on the 10th of February. Come see the show. It's on at Sim Smith, Camberwell.
The show in LA?
Oh, yeah. That doesn't open till June.
It'll definitely be out by then.
Yeah, it will be out by then. So that's not till the end of June 2024. And then I've got a show with James Cohen Gallery that's
New York?
That opens today until the 10th of February as well.
Perfect. That's good.
Which is great.
That will please our American audience.
Yeah, so you can see it, and you can see a few paintings in New York, which is great.
All the details for the shows she's just mentioned will be in the show notes of this episode. Thank you to Kemi Onabulé. Thank you to Sim Smith for hosting us. That's it from me today. We'll be back with you real soon. Till that moment comes, take care of yourselves and each other.